The sea teaches patience better than any priest ever could. Eliza stayed aboard my ship for weeks. Not in chains. Not locked below deck. I wanted to see what she would do when given space. Fear reveals more than pain. She watched everything. She learned the rhythm of the ship, the moods of the crew, the way the wind shifted before storms. She noticed things most men never did. That alone made her dangerous. One night, as the moon split the water into silver scars, she spoke again. "You think the sea made you," she said quietly, "but it only shows what was already there." I told her to sleep. She smiled like someone who had already won. Piracy is not endless battle. Most days are silence, wind, waiting, rotting food, men arguing over nothing because boredom eats at the mind faster than hunger. That is when mutiny is born. I sensed it before it showed its teeth. Whispers that stopped when I approached. Looks held a second too long. Hands resting near blades, even when no threat stood before us. The crew had grown rich. Rich men grow stupid. They start believing survival is owed to them. It is not. The mutiny came at dawn. 3 men rushed me. One slipped on wet planks. One hesitated. One was fast. I killed 2. The third jumped overboard. The crew watched. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I simply ordered the bodies thrown to the sea and resumed breakfast. That night, no one slept well. Power restored itself. Weeks later, we found a ship drifting, sails torn, crew missing. No sign of battle. No blood. The sea does not always explain itself. We boarded cautiously. The cargo was untouched. The log ended mid-sentence. Something had taken them. Superstition is another kind of mutiny. I crushed it quickly. We took what we could and burned the rest. As the flames climbed. Eliza stood beside me. "Some things don't need swords," she said. I did not ask what she meant. Time passed the way it always does at sea, slowly. Then all at once, I became less human. Not crueler, emptier. I stopped remembering the faces of those I killed. Numbers replaced names. Tallies replaced guilt. That is when the dreams began. Water filling my lungs. Hands dragging me down. Voices asking my name again and again until I could not answer. I woke choking. Salt on my lips. Eliza watched from the shadows. "You're already drowning," she said. The Spanish bounty followed us for months. Gold makes men loyal. Fear makes them relentless. We lost 2 ships. Dozens of men. The sea drank deeply. In the final battle. Smoke blinded the sky. Cannon fire turned the world into thunder. I stood at the helm, blood running into my boots, laughing like a madman because fear had finally lost its grip on me. Victory came. At a cost. When the smoke cleared, Eliza was gone. No body. No blood. Just absence. For the first time in years, the sea felt cold. The sea was quiet after she disappeared. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing things that are not there. I told myself she had escaped. Slipped into the water during the chaos. Let the current carry her away. A clever ending. A clean one. The sea does not give clean endings. Days passed. Then weeks. Her absence settled into the ship like damp rot, spreading without being seen. The men felt it too. They spoke less, laughed less, watched me more. I dreamed of her standing at the edge of the deck, hair moving though. There was no wind. Every time I woke, the water was closer. We made for Tortuga to repair and resupply. Land had begun to feel foreign beneath my boots, like walking on something that might reject me. Tortuga smelled of sin and survival. Rum, sweat, smoke, desperation. A place where men pretended the sea had not marked them. I drank until the room tilted. That was when I saw her. Eliza sat in the corner, untouched, watching me as if she had never left. I reached for her. Fell instead. She did not help me up. You don't belong on land, she said. You never did. When I woke, she was gone again. Only then did I realize the truth. She was no longer flesh. We left. Tortuga under a sky heavy with warning. The crew avoided my eyes. They whispered my name now, the way sailors whisper about storms. I began speaking to the sea. Not prayers, conversations, and answered in waves and creaking wood. I stopped sleeping, on the 42nd. Night after Tortuga, the ship struck something solid, not land. A wreck, an old ship. Long dead, lodged beneath the surface like a corpse that refused burial. Its mast clawed at the sky, as we circled it. My blood turned cold, the name carved into the hull was one. I knew. The Raven's Mercy, my first ship. Impossible. She had sunk years ago. Burned and broken. The crew refused to board. Even the bravest men fear ghosts. I went alone that time, had eaten the ship. Barnacles coated her like armor. The deck sagged beneath my weight, below. In the captain's quarters, I found the log, my handwriting. Entries I did not remember writing. Dates that had not yet happened. The final line read, "You do not escape the sea. You only borrow time, behind me." Footsteps, Captain Hollis Gray stood in the doorway, eyes hollow, beard rotted with salt. "You learned too late," he said. I ran. When I returned to the Salt Crown, the crew was gone, no signs of struggle. No boats missing. Only the sea, calm and waiting. Eliza stood at the bow. "You're ready now," she said. "For what?" I asked. "To understand," she replied. The water began to rise. The water crept across the deck without a sound. It did not rush. It did not threaten. It simply claimed space, inch by inch, like something that knew resistance was pointless. I did not run. Eliza stepped closer, her feet never touching the wet planks. "You spent your life taking," she said. "Gold, lives, time. Now the sea takes its share." I asked her what she was. She considered the question, then shook her head. "I'm what you listen to when the waves are louder than your conscience." The water reached my knees, cold, heavy, familiar. I woke in my cabin, dry, alone for a moment. I believed it had been a dream. Then I saw the crew list nailed to the wall. Every name crossed out, including mine. We sailed again. I do not know how long. Days blurred. The sun rose and set like a habit it could not break. The ship obeyed me, though no hands worked the ropes. Sails adjusted themselves. The wheel turned beneath my grip like a living thing. I was no longer captain. I was cargo. Other ships began to see us. They ran. Some fired. Their shots passed through us, splashing harmlessly into the sea. Men stared in horror as the Salt Crown glided past without sound. Without wind, we did not board them. We followed, always, just close enough to be seen. Fear is a better weapon than steel. The dreams stopped. Instead, memories came while I was awake. Every face I had erased returned. The boy on the Spanish ship, the mutineer who slipped, Captain Gray, coughing blood, my father on the dock, broken and unpaid. They stood on the water, watching as we passed. None of them spoke. They did not need to. Eliza appeared less often now. When she did, she looked tired. "Is this my punishment?" I asked her once. She shook her head. "This is your purpose." Years passed. I stopped counting. Ports changed. Flags changed. Cannons grew larger. Men grew louder and died faster. The sea stayed the same. Sometimes a ship would surrender without a fight. Their captain would kneel, babbling promises, gold at my feet. I never took it. Gold has no weight here. One night, a storm unlike any other rose from nothing. The sky split. The sea climbed. Waves taller than cathedrals crashed against us. Yet the Salt Crown did not break. At the heart of the storm stood a whirlpool. Wide as a city. The end of all currents. Eliza waited at the bow. "It's time," she said. "For what?" I asked. "To decide." She answered. At the edge of the whirlpool, I saw them. Every ship I had destroyed. Every man I had doomed. Their wrecks spiraled downward, endless, grinding against one another as the sea pulled them into darkness. At the center waited something vast, and still, not a monster, a mirror. I stepped forward. Sea rose to my chest. For the first time in decades, I felt fear again, not of death, of being forgotten. The closer we drifted to the center, the quieter everything became. The storm did not fade. It simply stopped touching us. Wind froze in place. Waves hung like sculptures of glass. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, heavy, tired. The mirror beneath the water sharpened, revealing not my face, but every version of me that had ever existed. The boy on the docks, the bleeding deckhand, the laughing killer, the empty captain. They stared upward, waiting. Eliza stood beside me, her shape flickering like a reflection disturbed by breath. "This is where most men lie," she said. "They tell the sea they had no choice." I swallowed. "And if I don't?" She met my eyes. "Then you stay." The sea rose again, lifting the Salt Crown like a leaf. Memories slammed into me. A town burning because it was easier than sparing it. A sailor I left chained because he begged too loudly. The mutineer's body sinking, eyes open, accusing. Each moment pulled me downward. The mirror cracked. I screamed my name. I had not spoken it in decades. The sound tore through the stillness like cannon fire. The sea recoiled, shocked by something it had not expected. Identity. Choice. The mirror shattered. The whirlpool collapsed inward, swallowing itself. The storm died as suddenly as it had been born. The Salt Crown drifted, whole and unchanged, on a calm, endless sea. Eliza was gone. This time, I did not look for her. I woke on a beach. Real sand, real sun, real pain in my bones. For a moment, I thought I had been given mercy. Then I saw the wreckage. The Salt Crown lay broken offshore, finally dead. No crew, no flag, no legend left to carry her name. Only me. I lived among fishermen for years. Quiet, anonymous. I mended nets. I fixed boats. I spoke little. The sea watched. It always does. Men came to the village sometimes, whispering stories of a ghost ship that followed pirates, merchants, kings alike. A ship that did not attack, only reminded. They asked if I believed in it. I said nothing. On my final night, I walked into the water. Not running, not dragged, choosing. The sea was warm. It did not resist. As it closed over my head, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, release. Now I speak to you. Not from hell, not from heaven. From the space between waves. Remember this. The sea does not judge. It remembers. And one day, so will you. I thought that would be the end. It was not. Death, I learned, is not a door. It is a tide. It pulls, releases, then pulls again. When I opened my eyes, I was not breathing water nor air. I was suspended in something heavier than both, like memory itself had weight. Voices drifted past me. Not words, feelings, regret, hunger, rage, longing. The sea keeps everything. I began to drift. Time no longer behaved. Moments stretched until they felt like years, then collapsed into seconds. I watched ships being built from forests that were still standing. I watched them rot before they ever sailed. I watched men pray, curse, love, murder, and drown, all in the span of a single heartbeat. I was not punished. I was catalogued eventually. I felt myself rising, not to the surface, to awareness. I stood on a familiar deck. Not the salt crown, older, smaller, the planks were freshly laid, the sails unpatched, the crew young and loud and full of belief. A man leaned against the rail, laughing, my father, whole, unbroken, alive. I reached for him, my hand passed through his shoulder like mist. This is not mercy, I whispered. The sea answered by rocking the ship gently. The vision shifted. Now I stood in a port I recognized. The day my life split in two. The Raven's Mercy tied to the dock, black and waiting. My younger self stared at her with hunger in his eyes, wanted to scream. I wanted to stop him. I could not. The sea does not allow edits, only replays again and again. I was shown the same truth from different angles. Every choice I made had been mine. Every cruelty justified. Every mercy delayed until it was meaningless. Freedom had never been stolen from me. I had spent it. Something changed. I was no longer alone. Others drifted nearby now. Shapes like men, like women, like things that had once been human. All of us watching our lives unfold. Helpless witnesses to our own decisions. This was the afterlife of the sea. Not fire. Not judgment. Memory without end. A presence moved through us. Not Eliza. Older. Vaster. It did not speak, but understanding flowed from it like current. Some are kept. Some are returned. Some are used. I felt myself being pulled again. Purpose does not ask permission. I opened my eyes to cannon fire. The smell of smoke and fresh blood burned my nose. Men screamed orders in a language I half recognized. I was on a ship. Alive. Young. Strong. I looked at my hands. UNSCARRED. I staggered to a barrel and saw my reflection in the polished metal. Not my face. Another man's. His name came to me, like a tide marking a shore. He would become a pirate. He would make the same mistakes, unless someone whispered. Sooner, I understood then. I was not spared. I was. ASSIGNED, I learned his thoughts before I learned his name. Fear tastes the same in every century. He was called Thomas Reed, 19 years old, born inland, too far from the sea to understand it, yet pulled toward it all the same. He had signed onto this ship to escape debt, not knowing the sea collects interest in blood. I did not speak at first. I watched. That is how the sea teaches. The battle ended quickly. The enemy fled. The crew cheered. Thomas laughed with them, drunk on survival, convinced bravery had saved him. That night, while he slept in the cramped darkness below deck, I sat at the edge of his thoughts. I did not whisper words. I showed him images. A blade hesitating. A man drowning. Gold slipping through open fingers. A ship sailing without a crew. He woke screaming. They told him it was just a dream. Dreams are how the sea practices. Days passed. Then weeks. Every time Thomas made a small choice, I leaned closer. When he stole extra rations, I showed him hunger. When he ignored a beaten deckhand, I showed him chains. When he laughed at cruelty, I showed him silence. He began to change, not kinder, aware. Awareness is more dangerous than kindness. He started asking questions captains do not like. Why do we burn the ship after? Why not let them live? Why does the sea feel heavier at night? Men told him to shut his mouth. I smiled. The storm came without warning. Storms always do. As waves tore across the deck, Thomas slipped and nearly vanished overboard. He clawed at rope, screaming. the sea roaring like it recognized him. Wrapped myself around his fear, not to save him, not to teach him. He survived, but something stayed with him, something watching back. He began to hear me then, not my voice, not my weight. Standing alone at night and knowing someone is behind you, he turned. Often nothing, their good years blurred forward. Thomas rose quickly, too quickly. Men followed him because he did not shout, because he listened, because he hesitated before killing. That hesitation would either save him or damn him. When the chance came to turn pirate, to take command, to claim freedom with blood, Thomas stood alone on the deck, staring into the water. I stood there too, this time. I spoke. "You can still choose," I said. He whispered back, voice shaking, "So could you." The sea went still, did not answer. I did not need to. The silence was my confession. Thomas stepped away from the rail. He chose differently than I had. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but enough. That is how the sea redeems. Not by erasing. By diverting. I felt myself thinning as his path changed, my purpose loosening, the weight lifting. One day he would never feel me again. That was the price. That was the gift. As I faded, I felt the sea one last time. Not cold. Not cruel. Endless. Patient. Waiting for the next name, the next choice, the next story. Asterisk. Asterisk. I thought fading would feel like dying. It did not. It felt like being unbound. The sea loosened its grip slowly, carefully, as if afraid I might fall apart too quickly. I drifted between moments again, thinner now, less defined, like a shadow stretched by sunset. Thomas Reed lived on. That mattered, without purpose. Time returned to me in fragments. I watched centuries pass away. A man watches clouds. Ships changed shape. Sails gave way to smoke. Wood to iron. Iron to steel. But the sea never flinched. Men still fed it. They always will. Sometimes I was pulled close again. A sailor falling at night. A captain choosing profit over mercy. A boy staring at the horizon with the same hunger I once had. Was not sent every time. Only when the balance tipped too far. Only when the sea needed a reminder. I learned then that Eliza had never been. Singular. She was a form, a voice. The sea shapes when a man is close enough to hearing himself. Sometimes she wore a face. Sometimes a memory. Sometimes regret. She had worn kindness for Thomas. She had worn truth for me. Once, long after cannons had gone quiet and maps were nearly complete, I was drawn to a steel ship cutting through fog. Men laughed on deck, careless, confident, untouchable, they believed. One slipped. The sea took him fast. As he sank, eyes wide, he saw me. Not as a ghost. As himself. Older, broken, honest. Stopped screaming. The water closed. That was when I understood. The sea does not punish. It prepares. I no longer know how long it has been. Means little when you are memory shaped into warning. I have no name now. Names are for those who still believe they will be remembered. If you are listening to this story, if my words found you somehow, understand this. You are already standing at the rail. You make choices every day. That feels small because the water is calm. It will not always be. When it rises, it will not ask who you meant to be, only who you were. The sea will remember. And if you listen closely, on nights when the world goes quiet, you may feel it watching. Not with malice. With patience, waiting to see what you choose. Next, I did not expect silence after that. But silence came. Anyway, not the absence of sound. There is no such thing at sea, but the absence of pull. No current dragging me toward consequence. No voice shaping itself into meaning. Just drift. For the first time since boyhood, I was not needed. That frightened me more than storms ever had. I wandered the deep places where light does not reach. Wrecks lay there like prayers never answered. Ships stacked atop ships, centuries of ambition pressed into rust and bone. Names carved into hulls, eaten down to half-letters. I touched them and remembered for them. Someone must, sometimes. The sea showed me futures, not certainties, possibilities. A world where ships no longer needed wind, yet still vanished. Where men crossed oceans in days instead of months, but drowned all the same. Where the sea was measured, mapped, exploited, and never understood. Arrogance survives every era. I felt the pull again one night sharp, urgent, a modern vessel. Bright lights, music thumping through metal walls, laughter loud enough to challenge the dark. A young man stood alone at the rail, staring into black water lit by the ship's glow. He held a drink he did not want and thoughts he did not know how to carry. He leaned forward just slightly. Wrapped around him like cold, he shivered, stepped back lived that was enough it always is. The sea does not need prophets it needs pauses, moments where a hand hesitates. A foot steps back. A voice goes quiet long enough to hear something deeper than desire. That is my work now. If you can call it work, do not follow heroes. Heroes burn fast. I follow the tired, the angry, the almost lost, the ones closest to becoming someone they will not recognize later. I have learned something the living. Rarely do you do not need a great sin to be claimed. Small ones stack well. If this story feels unfinished, it is it must be as long as men stand at the edge of things and believe the fall will not notice them. There will be more to tell, more to remember, more to become. The sea waits it. Always has not to take you to see who you are. When no one else is watching, there are stretches where nothing calls to me for a long time, years, sometimes decades, pass without a single sharp tug. In those times, I drift low, where pressure folds sound into something soft and distant. The sea breathes down there, slow and deliberate, like a sleeping animal that knows it cannot be harmed. I listen. Currents speak differently at depth. Not in warnings, but in history. Every movement carries residue oil, bone, rust, memory. The sea never forgets a touch. That is why it remembers us better than we remember ourselves. When the next pull comes, it is never announced. It is felt. A wrongness. A tightening. A moment leaning too far in one direction. This time it is a fishing vessel. Small. Old. Crewed by men who have known the sea all their lives and still do not respect it. Familiarity breeds carelessness faster than arrogance ever could. One man argues, another drinks. Nets tangle. The engine coughs. Night presses in. I settle near the hull and wait. The accident is quick. A line snaps. Whips across the deck. A man goes down hard, skull meeting steel. Blood spills, dark and unreal under artificial light. Panic erupts. They shout his name. The sea hears it first. They drag him to the rail, screaming orders that contradict one another. Someone slips. Someone drops a flashlight. The beam vanishes into black water like a thought never finished. They lift him. Too late. He falls as he sinks. Time stretches the way it always does near the end. His eyes search wildly, not for help, but for meaning. He wants the story to make sense. Meet him halfway. Not as a figure as weight as knowing. I let him feel every choice that led here. Not to punish. To complete the thought. His struggling slows. Understanding replaces terror. The sea closes. On deck, The others stand frozen. One crosses himself. One swears. One stares at the water long after it has gone. Flat again. That one will remember. That is enough. I move on. Always. There is no dwelling in this work. Dwelling turns memory into nostalgia, and nostalgia is a lie shaped like comfort. The sea does not comfort. It clarifies. Sometimes I wonder if I am becoming less myself with each passing century. If identity erodes the way wood does, grain by grain, until only shape remains, perhaps that is the final mercy. To forget the boy. To forget the captain. Too. Become only function. Yet sometimes, rarely, I feel something like longing. Not for life, for weight, for the feeling of standing somewhere solid and knowing it will hold you. Land does. That the sea never promises. Have learned to love it anyway, not as a master, not as a god. As a truth. If you ever feel watched near deep water, if the silence feels heavier than it should, do not be afraid. Does not mean you are chosen, that it means you are noticed. And being noticed is only dangerous if you refuse to look back. There comes a point when even the sea grows crowded. Too many wrecks. Too many echoes overlapping. Too many half-finished stories pressing against one another like bodies in a storm swell. Memory thickens the water. Movement slows. That is when the sea does something unusual. It lets go. I felt it when it happened. Up, loosening so subtle, it took years to understand. Currents I had followed for centuries no longer pulled the same way. Moments that once burned bright, with urgency dulled into background noise, was no longer required everywhere. The sea was learning to forget. For a long time, that thought terrified me. If the sea forgets, what becomes of those shaped by its remembering? Of me? I drifted near coastlines then, watching waves erase footprints over and over. Children ran along the shore, daring the water to chase them. Lovers carved initials into wet sand, pretending permanence. The tide erased all of it. Faithfully. One evening, I felt something different. Not urgency. Invitation. A place where memory thinned instead of thickened. Where wrecks did not pile. Where currents smoothed instead of tangled. A shallower sea. A gentler forgetting followed it. Not downward. Inward. I found myself near a quiet harbor at dusk. Wooden boats rocked lazily, ropes creaking like old joints. A lighthouse blinked patiently, its beam sweeping without expectation of thanks. An old man sat at the end of the pier, legs dangling over water, fishing line unmoving. He HUMED. Badly. I recognized the tune. A dock song my father used to sing. I settled beside him. Unseen. He spoke without turning. She takes more than she gives, he said. I waited. But she gives enough, he continued. If you don't ask for everything. I had no voice, but for the first time in longer than I could measure, I did not need one. The line twitched. The man pulled, laughing softly as a small fish broke the surface, silver and alive. He unhooked it carefully and lowered it back into the water. Not you, he said. Gently, he watched it vanish. And he went home. Stayed. The harbor breathed. The sea here did not demand remembrance. It accepted release. I felt myself thinning again. But this time, it did not hurt. It felt like setting something heavy down after carrying it too long. Perhaps this is how it ends. Not with a final lesson, not with a warning, but with quiet observation. If so, then listen carefully. The loud stories belong to storms and battles. The truth lives in small moments when nothing is taken, and nothing is owed. The sea remembers, but it also knows when to let go. And now, so do I.